Hello, football fans, and welcome back to the Doug Steele Podcast. This is podcast number 4 here on YouTube, the official podcast, of course, of the all-created teams Dynasty here on Maximum Football 2019. Now, today we're going to go over some of the more notable results from Week 1's opening slate of games, as well as go over the new top 25 rankings that came out earlier today in this dynasty. And then at the very end, we are going to look at some notable games to look after as we move on to Week 2 here in the very first season of the All Created Teams Dynasty. But before I get into that, ladies and gentlemen, make sure you hit that like button, as well as subscribe to the channel if you're brand new as well. I would certainly truly appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel, as well as hit that notification bell, because you know how YouTube be sometimes. Now, for the opening week, we actually had a really exciting opening slate of games going on over the course of this week. First and foremost, let's jump into probably the most surprising upset over the course of this first week of games. First game, we have Mount Union that went on the road as the number 6 team in the country, taking on the Hamlin Pipers. And let me tell you something, ladies and gentlemen, Mount Union will not be ranked anymore. A little bit of a spoiler later on, as Hamlin destroys Mount Union 44-10. It was just probably the most surprising upset over the course of this entire week. And you know, I remember watching over this game initially thinking that, okay, Hamlin got off to a really strong start, but Mount Union was starting to wake up in that second quarter, so I assume, okay, maybe Mount Union is going to take over here over the course of the second half. But when that second half came, we actually saw quite the opposite. Hamlin decided to run away with it, and Hamlin ends up winning that ball game 44-10. So it will definitely be really interesting to see how high Hamlin rises up in the rankings if they do get a top 25 ranking, as well as how far do the Mount Union Purple Raiders fall, given, you know, maybe it could be a fluke, but, you know, if you're watching that game and you're a Mount Union fan, there's definitely a lot of things for you to be concerned about going forward. Next notable matchup that I want to talk about is the Moravian Greyhounds taking on the Leslie Wolverines. Now, the Moravian Greyhounds go into that matchup ranked 12th in the country, taking on an unranked Leslie Wolverines team, but did have some top 25 consideration going in. And Moravian, you know, proved that they deserved to be in the top 25. They ended up winning that game 44-27 in a rather nice little offensive showing to start off the season for the Greyhounds of Moravian University. The Bates Bobcats came in ranked 10th in the country, and they took on an unranked Eau Claire Blue Golds team from the Big Pacific, and Bates easily took care of business in what was a 38-7 blowout. Bates, of course, they come in with that top 10 ranking, and they do a pretty good job, if I say so myself, of holding on to it. Another notable matchup to look after is the North Carolina Wesleyan Battling Bishops. They went on the road to play against the St. John's Johnnies, who were surprisingly unranked going into this season. It was definitely a somewhat surprising turn of events to see them not ranked in the top 25, and they played like they were a team on a mission early on in the game. They, you know, played extremely close. It was, I believe, 14-13 at one point, but North Carolina Wesleyan was able to pull away in the second half of this ball game and was able to get a nice little 28-13 win on the road against the St. John's Johnnies for their opening game of the season. Next up, we have another upset that was able to take place, and that was from Elmhurst. Elmhurst from the Atlantic Coast, not the Atlantic Coast, but the Atlantic Shore Conference. they were able to beat a Birmingham Southern team by the score of 27 to 21. But Elmhurst, they weren't ranked, but Birmingham Southern, they had that recognition coming in as the number 17 team in the country, and they probably will not be ranked going forward since Elmhurst didn't have that much consideration for the top 25 poll, but they'll definitely get some more of that going forward as they get a nice home win, a nice signature win if I say so, in non-conference play with a 6-point lead. Up on notable list of week 1 results that I wanted to let you guys know about: Illinois Wesleyan, they hosted what was the number 16 team in the country in the Heidelberg Student Princes, and what happened in that game was that Illinois Wesleyan was able to beat them 23 to 15, which just kind of really piled on what was really a tough week for the Big North. As you can see on the left hand side of the screen, the standings of the Big North after one game, and the Big North ended up going 3-11, which is always extremely concerning considering the Big North should be considered part of the Power 5. And if you're a follower of the Big North, definitely something that you should be concerned about going through the rest of non-conference play. But needless to say, though, it was a really good win for Illinois Wesleyan University at the same time. Next up, we have the number 1 team in the country in the Berry Vikings going on the road to play against the Juniata Eagles, hailing from, I believe, the Atlantic Shore Conference as well. And I gotta say, when I was recording this game, this was probably the most entertaining game that I watched over the course of this past week, as Berry, they go off on a 19-point lead, start off 19-0, but then Juniata, they just kept clawing back, and it came down to the last couple of minutes, and Juniata was able to pull it off 44-42, get the upset at home, and beat the number 1 team in the nation, which is always really cool to see. And a great opening statement win for the Juniata school very early on in the season. Next up, we have RPI going on the road against a ranked Baldwin Wallace squad that was number 13 in the country. However, RPI, always known to be a pretty disciplined football program in comparison to many other Division III schools that are in this all-created teams dynasty, and they used that discipline in order to beat Baldwin Wallace 40-26, defeating the 13th ranked team in the entire nation. Speaking of national attention, let's make our way towards the Max Football game of the week for week 1. It was the 2nd ranked Amherst Mammoths taking on the 21st Middlebury Panthers in what was quite a defensive matchup that aired on, I believe, Thursday? Yeah, Thursday night was when this game aired. Went down to the last overtime period, which is always really cool to see whenever it's the game of the week. And yeah, it was an extremely cool game to watch. If you want to watch this game in full, it will be linked down in the description below if you want to go check it out. But it was a great win, though, for the Middlebury Panthers, getting the win over the number 2 team in the country and staying in the top 25. Next up, we have the West Hartford Bantams. I believe that is a chicken, going on the road to play against the Red Wing Bulldogs. West Hartford came into that game as the number 6 team in the nation. Red Wings didn't have that ranking, and it proved last time why both those rankings were pretty accurate. West Hartford was able to go in there and beat them pretty handily, as they were able to secure a 48-12 victory on the road. A nice opening win for the West Hartford program, as they're eligible for the NCAA Division III playoffs for the first time since they were part of a conference that didn't play outside of the conference, but now they get a chance to show what they can truly do now that they are outside of those restrictions. Next up, we have the Muskegon Muskies going on the road to play against a unranked Winfield Wildcats team. Winfield was not ranked, but Muskegon was at number 11 going into week 1, and let me just say that will no longer be the case, at least for Muskegon being ranked, because Winfield was able to blow these guys out 37-6. Probably another one of those surprising matchups, and it just continues to. It was a terrible week for the Big North Conference as a whole, and Muskegon and Mount Union were a big reason why it was just rough. It was a very rough go for the Big North, but Winfield was able to get a fantastic win, winning that game 37-6. Next up, we have the Guilford Quakers going on the road to play against, I believe it was the number 6 team in the country, and actually no, excuse me, number 5 in the Trinity Tigers, hosted on Pool Water Tees channel. Trinity was able to win 27-15, although Guilford should definitely be applauded for giving a fantastic effort, as the game was a lot closer than what it was originally supposed to be. I almost forgot about this game, but this game was extremely close and really put the Williams Fs in on upset alert. It was almost compounded on the lack of success that the Big North had for this week, but they were able to pull it out 24-23. It was definitely a pretty tough game for both teams, but Williams was able to show a little bit more mental toughness over the course of the game, and they were able to pull it out in the end and win that game by a single point. In another matchup of top 25 teams, the number 23 ranked St. Thomas Tommies went on the road to play against the 24th ranked Belhaven Blazers. This game may show that it was only 31-19, but let me tell you something, ladies and gentlemen, it was not as close as what the score may tell you, because St. Thomas was up 24-0 going into the final quarter of play, and at that point, that was when Belhaven was able to get all those points in the fourth quarter, make it at least on paper look a little bit more competitive, but St. Thomas, they had control of this game the entire time and were able to win on the road against a solid Belhaven Blazers football team. Speaking of solid, we run into the Johns Hopkins Blue Jays, making with their new coach making a debut up against the Wheaton Thunder, and Johns Hopkins, despite a transition in the coaching staff, they were able to pull out the win 41-18. Johns Hopkins was able to get a nice little dub out there for their new coach and prove that they deserve to be ranked very highly, and they are definitely could be a team to make a lot of noise whenever the postseason comes around 14 to 15 weeks from now. But for now, Johns Hopkins sure is going to enjoy this 41-8 team, as well as doing it on the road as well, which is always a nice little bonus. But if you aren't a huge fan of offense and prefer the defense, though, let me tell you about this DePaul Tigers and Hardin-Simmons Cowboys game. Hardin-Simmons came in ranked number 19 in the country, as DePaul came in ranked 20th, and boy oh boy, this was a defensive game to behold, as both teams managed to get a safety early on in this game. And what was really the difference is that Hardin-Simmons was able to get a touchdown and DePaul was only able to get a couple of field goals. So not a lot of offense that was going on in this game, but hey, if you love defense, Sin with Vengeance will have you covered. He has the color commentary for this game, and it was like I said, it was a nice little defensive matchup, but Hardin-Simmons at home was able to edge it out in a very ugly 9-8 margin of victory. Up next, we have the number 3 ranked Central Colonials going on the road to play against the unranked North Central Cardinals. Now, North Central on my Doug Steele Podcast poll back in podcast number 1, I had them ranked in the top 5 going into this season, but the coaches poll had them not ranked at all. And I think with this game, it shows that North Central should have been ranked by the coaches poll this entire time, because they were able to really make a statement against Central. Central is a good team. They're ranked number 3 for a reason, and I believe they're still a top 25 caliber team, but this is more North Central being ranked much higher, or much higher regarded than what they were coming into this preseason from the coach's perspective. And now hopefully North Central will get a top 25 ranking whenever the new top 25 poll comes out later on in this episode. Finally, the last game that was commentated by my fellow conference coordinators that are collabing with me on this series is an unranked Wartburg Knights teams taking on the 22nd ranked Ucernus Bears. The Bears ended up winning 40-16. Wartburg did have their chances to go forth and try to make this more of a game, but they just couldn't capitalize in that red zone when it mattered, and Ucernus does, and that's really what separates you from a top 25 squad and being average or being not very good whatsoever. So Ucernus, they're gonna end up winning 40-16. Also on the docket in terms of notable games that were played over the course of week 1 was the Mary Hardin Baylor Crusaders, the defending national champions in real life for Division 3. They opened the season ranked number 18 in the country for some reason, not getting the most love, but they went on the road against the Bethany Bison, and maybe the coaches do have a point here, as Mary Hardin Baylor was only won this game by a field goal, and it was possible that Bethany could have won this game if it wasn't for some last second miscues. But Mary Hardin Baylor certainly has some things to work on, but hey, a win is a win, even if it's not very pretty. Finally, the last game that I wanted to check over is the Albion Britons winning 34-3 against the Hartlick Hawks. Albion was able to win this game easily at home with that 30+ margin of victory, and it certainly was nice to see them take care of business at home early on before getting into National Athletic Conference play. So now that we've gone through the first week of notable results that occurred, let's take a look at the top 25 poll for week 2. So I gotta say, this is absolute insanity what kind of changes are occurring in this top 25 poll, because out of the 25 teams that are in this poll, we have a grand total of 19 newcomers in the poll, which is absolutely insane. I think it's broken down. I think how the game decides the rankings is by what their record is, and then how many points has that team scored over the course of the season. So if that's the case, then those defensive-minded teams are going to have a tough time climbing up in the rankings, but we do see a couple of familiar faces. West Hartford, they jump up from number 6 to becoming the new number 1 team in the country. Johns Hopkins and Moravian is also there, but a ton of new faces in this top 25, and it's probably going to be absolute chaos for the first 3 to 4 weeks of the season, and then maybe once we get into the second third of this season, then the rankings are going to be more stable. But this is your top 25 rankings, and yeah, this is what it looks like. What is your biggest shock in this top 25 coaches poll? Let me know down in the comments below what your thoughts are on that. Alright, so now that we went through what happened in the previous week, as well as the top 25 coaches poll as of right now, let's take a look at some notable games to look after for week 2. So we have the now unranked Trinity Tigers going on the road to play against the 6th ranked Johns Hopkins Blue Jays, who last week did go on the road against Wheaton for a convincing 41-18 victory. Trinity is going to try to prove that They should have had no business falling out of the top 25 whatsoever. And John Hopkins, of course, is trying to go 2-0 and continued to build off the strong start that they had to start the season in the previous week. Next up, we have an unranked Salisbury team going on the road to play against the 13th ranked Bethel Royals in what should be a pretty interesting matchup. Poolwater T is going to go and he's going to be commentating over on his channel. Of course, as for week 1, all conference coordinator games will be linked down in the description below and will be updated with the links to the games versus to their channels as those games come out over the course of the week, hopefully. Speaking of hope, we have the unranked Hamilton Continentals going on the road to play against the 4th ranked Moravian Greyhounds. Moravians coming off that 44-27 victory, whereas Hamilton is 0-1. They're going to try their best and hope that they can do enough to avoid an 0-2 start. That game is going to be over on Tyler's 6357 channel over the course of this week, but should be a pretty exciting game to watch nonetheless. Speaking of excitement, we have Concordia Moorhead, who has entered the top 25 for the first time this season at number 21 in the country, going on the road to play against the Montclair State Redhawks, who are also 1-0. Be an interesting thing to see who is going to come out 2-0 at the end of this particular ball game. Next up, we have the 5th ranked Juniata Eagles going on the road to play against a 0-1 Utica Pioneers team. Juniata is coming off a huge victory being the previously ranked number 1 team in the country in Barry, 44-42. Be interesting to see if they continue to keep that momentum going or if they kind of have a little bit of a hangover from week 1 and allow Utica to stay in this game longer than maybe they actually should be. But should be an interesting game nonetheless. See how Juniata responds to a not as talented opponent as the Barry Vikings here in week 2. This game is also going to be over on Craniac Gaming's channel as well. Of course, links will be down in the description below. Next up, we have a now unranked Amherst team going on the road to play against the 15th ranked William Patterson Pioneers. Amherst lost in overtime to what was the 21st ranked Middlebury Panthers at the time, so I don't see why they are completely unranked, but they can right the ship here if they can get an upset victory over William Patterson, who is now ranked 15th in the country after a rather large win over, I believe, Wilmington in the previous week. Speaking of big jumps or big falls, we have the Nebraska Wesleyan Prairie Wolves, who are now ranked 10th in the country, going on the road to play against an unranked 0-1 Buffalo State Bengals team. That game is going to be hosted by Big C Got Game, so make sure you check him out after the end of his podcast as well. Next up, we have the 25th ranked La Crosse Eagles going on the road to play against the Stevens Point Pointers in what is going to be Big Pacific Conference play. Be a nice little leg up competition early on in the season. Sioux has the advantage early on. I'm going to, of course, give the edge to La Crosse even though they're on the road, but we'll see how that turns out because you never know when conference play starts to come around. Up next, we have an unranked Otterbein Cardinals team who was one of the few teams to win their week 1 matchup within the Big North, go on the road to play against the 24th ranked Tufts Jumbos, who are now ranked 24th in the country. That game will be hosted by Sin with Vengeance over on his channel later on this week. Following that, we have the number 1 team in the country in the West Hartford Bantams. Coming off a big win against Red Wings, they go on the road once again to play a now unranked Birmingham Southern Panthers team who tries to right the ship after taking an upset against Elmhurst in week 1. That game will be hosted by Royal and Poison. And then we have our game of the week that hits the only ranked matchup for week 2 is the 14th ranked Winfield Wildcats going on the road to play against the 18th ranked Rochester Yellow Jackets. I think I'm going to give it to Rochester. I think they'll have the edge given, they're about the same talent level as Winfield, and they're going to be at home, so I'm going to be rocking with them. But that's going to be over on my YouTube channel. That's going to be dropping on Friday night at 6 p.m. Eastern. So make sure to tune in for that when that video drops on Friday, ladies and gentlemen. Following the game of the week, we have the Hamlin Pipers, who are surprisingly ranked at number 3 in the country, coming off a huge win against the Mount Union Purple Raiders. They go on the road against the Pacific Boxers, who are 0-1, and will try to prevent their team from going 0-2. That game is going to be hosted by Octagonal Gaming whenever that game drops. Then we have the Hardin-Simmons Cowboys, who won a tough defensive matchup against DePaul 9-8. They're going to go on the road, leave the confines of their home stadium to play against a now ranked Alma Scots with that 22nd overall ranking. What should be a pretty interesting matchups. See if Hardin-Simmons can find more of an offensive rhythm this time around, because if not, then I think Alma is going to end up winning this ball game. Next up, we have the 20th ranked Albion Britons, who were 1-0 and blew out Hartwick last week 34-3, if I'm not mistaken. They'll go on the road to play against the St. Olaf Owls, who won their game last week 27-11. Pretty sure if St. Olaf wins this game, they should be ranked in the top 25. But Albion has no plan on leaving the top 25 ranking either. So probably the winner of this game will definitely be in the top 20, if not top 15. I'm calling it right now, ladies and gentlemen. Now we have the now 9th ranked Ursinus Bears go on the road against the Keene Cougars. Ursinus won their game pretty handily last week, 40-26 against the Wartburg Knights. Keene, of course, is coming off a pretty tough loss in week 1. They'll probably go 0-2 here, since they're probably as good, if not as talented, as Wartburg was in the previous week. Next, we have the Mary Hardin Baylor Crusaders, the defending champs, but are currently unranked. They'll go on the road against the Platteville Pioneers, who are actually favored at number 17 in the country, although I wouldn't be shocked if I saw them get upset by Mary Hardin Baylor, because until somebody takes down the champ, they're number 1 in my book, personally speaking. Then we have Adrian College going on the road against the Susquehanna Riverhawks. Adrian is 23rd in the country, making their first appearance in the coaches poll. Gonna have to give it to Adrian. Adrian looked pretty good in their top 25 not their top 25, but their previous week matchup. Give me Adrian in this one. Then we have an unranked Austin Kangaroos team going on the road against the 16th ranked Trine Thunder, who during the course of their game, Trine won 36-15. They are currently on top of the National Athletic Conference standings as of right now, so not really too much to discuss here. I'm pretty sure Trine will end up winning this game pretty handily. We then have the Sul Ross State Lobos, who are currently 1-0 on the season, go on the road to play against the 7th ranked Methodist Monarchs in what might be a more intriguing matchup. Methodist is averaging 41 points a game, but they also gave 40 points in the matchup as well. So for Methodist, it'll be interesting to see. Rather, it's more so can their offense hold up and can their defense play better? Because if, I don't know if their offense can score 40 points a game, and if their defense doesn't play any better, I think Sul Ross State will end up winning this game and win on the road. This game can be found and commentated on by Franchise Gaming. We then have the Wartburg Knights, who just took a 2-touchdown loss to the Ursinus Bears, go on the road to play against the now number 2 ranked North Central Cardinals. Gotta feel bad for Wartburg here as they played another ranked team on the road last week, but now they gotta go play North Central. This game will be commentated on by TNJ later on this week. We also have an unranked Elmhurst Blue Jays team going on the road against the Howard Payne Yellow Jackets, who are ranked number 19 in the country. Elmhurst scored the very first upset of the season, beating Birmingham Southern, who was ranked 17th, 27-21, but that was at home. But you know, don't sleep on Elmhurst here because they already beat one ranked team. They're playing another team that isn't ranked as highly as maybe Birmingham Southern was going into the season. So, you know, don't sleep on Elmhurst, but I think Howard Payne should win this game nonetheless. Then we have the 8th ranked RPI Engineers going on the road to play against an Augustania Vikings team, which is having their opening day for week 2 as they were on bye last week. That game is going to be commentated on by Gridiron Games. And then finally we have the unranked Iowa Wesleyan Tigers, who only lost by a single touchdown last game. They go on the road against the 12th ranked Bates Bobcats. That game is going to be commentated on by the coach, aka Coach Plays Games, in what could be an interesting matchup since Iowa Wesleyan did play their matchup pretty tough in the previous week. Alright, so that's all I have for today. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this video. Make sure you leave a like and let me know down in the comments about what matchup that you're most excited about for this week 2 slate of games. Until then, I'll see you guys next time, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Take care.